All right. Welcome back. We are joined by Jeff Rueter. Please correct me if I'm saying that wrong.
You nailed it. It's been great.
Sweet. Okay. If you don't know who Jeff is a writer for The Athletic and amazing coverage of the USL along with Minnesota United. So we brought Jeff on because, as you guys know, USL Championship starting back up. And with Legion, especially, we're all hyped for the year. We just want to get a little rundown of a couple things with Jeff and insights per se. And so how are you doing, Jeff, today?
I'm doing all right. I'm here having forgotten that this was a video recorded podcast. So I am here in my very natural state of an A-tank, a backwards hat, and a coffee mug at all hours of the day. So this is it. This is the magical writing process. This is the journalist craft, all of this stuff that people talk about. This is it. I am wearing pants though, so that's big.
That's the best way to do it, man. I just want to dive right in. So USL is coming back. For anybody who is not aware, can you just give like a brief rundown of basically what's gone on?
Well, we'll hedge it first and say the USL has a plan to come back.
There we go.
What people may have missed is that the USL and its players have been in a very extended dialogue about terms of a return to play, specifically looking at things like pay cuts, looking at the league distributed relief for each club during this crisis, because that is the big talking point, I guess, right now, is how much money are teams losing, especially in a league like the USL, which is so community centric, not driven by advertising or television broadcast deals, and advertisement dependent within their market. A lot of those advertisements, of course, come with playing games. If you can't play games, you can't cash those checks. So the league has been helping foot that bill a little bit recently. So the players and the league still need to come to a decision. And when we talk about the league, we aren't saying headquarters down in Tampa are negotiating directly with the players. The headquarters, Jake Edwards, the president of the league, Alec Papadakis, the CEO, they respond to their owners, and there's a labor committee of, I believe it's about 8 or 10 owners. I may be wrong on that figure, but I know a few of them who are on there. They come up with these terms. They are the ones who finesse these deals that say the first $1,800 a month are untouched, and after that 20% cuts. That is something that the owners are coming up with, including some owners who've been putting out on Twitter some promises that maybe they won't be able to keep, but we'll get into that later if those promises go unfulfilled. So that is the big sticking point at this point. However, the league has approved a return to play model, which would see teams play in their own home markets. Probably their home stadiums, unless they don't own their stadium, in which case they have to work out the lease and the safety agreements for colleges or high schools or whatever else. But that is where things stand right now. And it is still very much a holding pattern, wait and see, as these talks go back and forth.
So in your opinion, and obviously the sports world has been somewhat shut down for the last few months.
Yeah.
With the exception of maybe the soccer world, at least, maybe the exception of Belarus still playing. Describe the importance of COVID-19 in a general sense on a league like the USL.
I mean, when you look at other leagues, when you look at Major League Baseball, Major League Soccer, the NBA, NFL, the game is a big part of the product, but as big a part of the product, arguably, is the marketing branch, which includes the off season. And I think that when you look at the NBA off season and the NFL offseason in particular, with their versions of free agency, with the excitement that their fan bases have in general, which the MLB hasn't and certainly may never get again after kind of the ongoing talks that are going on with their commissioner, Rob Manfred. What you are seeing is a moment where, even with the sports world on freeze, there are still other things that you can discuss. There are other products, other commodities. You can have rookie drafts. You can have the NFL draft. You can have the NBA draft, and those will get serious ratings. You can put out a documentary of footage from the 90s and run it out of 10 episodes and probably win an Emmy for it if you're ESPN. There's just so many other options and opportunities. But with the USL in particular, you don't have that backlog, because this is a league which doesn't acknowledge its history before 2011, before the current iteration, the USL Pro era. So they don't really look at the nostalgia trip. They're not going to show you Crystal Palace Baltimore in late 2008 or whatever. So that's an issue. You also have a league which, again, is very reliant on match day revenue. The pay cuts that they would be asking players to take wouldn't even scratch the surface. And frankly, it wouldn't even come close to the amount which the USL has divvied up across its 47 clubs, which is about $117,000 per club. So, I mean, what is your product when your product isn't there, right? I mean, like, because it is a soccer league, it is an entertainment entity, it is a community organization. When the community can't get together to be entertained by your product, you are reaching at this point to try to, and I completely understand it. I completely understand wanting to announce the return to play model before you can come back to play, because you need to be able to keep that dialogue. You need to keep things in the news cycle. You need to keep your name out there. But it is a challenge right now. It unmistakably is a challenge. I think there are going to be a few clubs who are in far worse strains of health as a result of this than they would have been before. No pun intended, darkly. I mean, seriously, like there are going to be clubs in danger because of this. But that's just the reality of lower division sports and lower division soccer in general.
And I was going to say, I mean, on a regular basis, we're hearing about clubs dealing with less money than they should in many situations, or even bankruptcy. And like last year with Fresno, just teams that, can't afford to play because they're not making enough money. And my question was, with all this stuff dealing with money, how much do you know about the teams who normally play in a baseball stadium or have leases with these stadiums that they don't have their own actual stadium? Does that make it easier? Does that make it more difficult for them? Like, what would that be about?
It depends on the terms of each of their leases, I would say. And there are some where there are these force majeure clauses, which is something that no sports fan wanted to think about 3 months ago. And now suddenly everyone knows very well what a force majeure clause is, because every league is dealing with it right now. But sometimes there are these other contracts, we call them just like act of God if they're really outdated, to use like 1800s parlance. But this is something that's unavoidable. This isn't something where the team decided it wasn't going to play its game at Lucas Oil Stadium and Indy 11 just wanted to move back to the Jimmy or whatever. This isn't any case like that. It's so unprecedented, and I know it's a word that's beaten to death these days, but it's so unprecedented that I think a lot of these teams are finding ways to work with their tenants so that they don't lose them in the future. So there is a little bit of a forgiveness that goes on with that. Colleges don't have other uses for their venues right now, and they don't have people on campus by the most part. So they might be a little more forgiving, actually, whereas others, depending on the region, if you're in California, if you're in Florida, if you're in the Northwest Pacific, they might be harder to rebook in those areas because they have been so affected. Anywhere on the borders have been tremendously affected by this, just outside of sports and just looking at the greater community. And so they have other, city by city, market by market, state by state sort of guidances that teams will also have to be keeping in mind. Playing in your own market isn't as easy as just reactivating those, because you also had to book out those dates, and usually you have to declare those dates back in January, which is these are the ones we will play so that the college can plan around us, or the baseball team, or high school, whatever, for Oklahoma City. And yet now all those days are shuffled. And now you don't just have the USL trying to reschedule on those dates. The colleges are trying to reschedule on those dates. Any other possible tenants, youth camps, they're all looking at the exact same blank calendar, trying to find ways to mix and match and make things work. And frankly, whoever owns it is going to have priority. The USL won't have priority in those circumstances. So that's a really big question, especially for minor league baseball teams, like you said, who have a lot more games to try to cram in. And every single minor league baseball team would prefer a weekend series to a midweek series, just in terms of how many families are able to get through the door.
Yeah, and I want to shift gears. Great breakdown, by the way. I want to shift gears. There was a meeting with the Board of Governors recently on a return to play plan. I believe I got that correct. 22-13 vote. 7 MLS2 teams voted no. And mainly I've been seeing because financial reasons. It just doesn't make sense because they want to put that money down towards Orlando and their teams going down there. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
That's a big part of it. There's also a part where you just need a player force for Orlando. I mean, you're seeing MLS teams signing homegrown players a lot this week already, and it's only Tuesday. I think there have been like 5 homegrown signings in the last 36 hours or something. And the reality is there are going to be players in MLS who opt out. MLS already has a very small roster size in soccer terms, the USL even smaller, but that's more budget, MLS by design. And so they need to fill numbers. And I think I've reported this too, that there were MLS clubs who were in talks with other USL clubs about either players they had loaned out or players of interest that they could either bring up on loan, cover their salaries. The USL team is happy. They don't have to cover any of this, but also the MLS team gets another player who's already used to the United States. Easiest assimilation process that you could possibly hope for. But if the USL is coming back, then suddenly that option might be off the table too. So I think with the MLS2 teams, that's a big part of it. The revenue isn't as much of a part of it for them. I mean, frankly, the teams who voted no aren't the teams who are drawing significant crowds anyway. So they're not operating off of match day revenue. And so for them, that's either a vote that's guided by, again, player logistics or safety concerns, because they've gone through this entire process now, those owners, of being reinforced over and over again, whether it's by MLS itself or by the CDC, by other governmental agencies, that they need to play in a bubble. And that this is the safe way to do it. You won't safely be able to resume play in places like Seattle, San Jose, Orlando, ironically, LA. Like we need to play in this very condensed space, and that's how you make it work. So then you come into this vote where you say, okay, but you're also going to be heading up to Tacoma. You're going to be heading over to Sacramento. You're going to be heading down to Orange County, and you're going to be heading over towards Orlando too, in the case of League One or Tampa Bay even. And that's a sticking point. And those are so conflicting ideologies of how to return to play, where it probably does make sense for the USL just in terms of its clubs. But there are some very real questions about if the timing is right in general for sports to come back. And I think you're seeing that with every league having that discussion right now. I don't think it's just like an MLS2 teams trying to take down the USL thing. I've seen that narrative in my mentions, and that's just so crazy to me. But I think that might be another episode. It's nothing quite like that. I think that there's just such conflicting opinions within that group where only 2 teams felt better about their situation and their layout and their finances, where they're able to make that vote a yes vote.
I think one of the biggest things for me, when you're taking into consideration the option to play in these hub cities or hub city singular, I would say that right now I'm in a state where I miss seeing the USL itself, because like we're huge Legion fans. So like we miss watching soccer, but I always found enjoyment in watching the Legion travel to places like New York, like Hartford, farther away up north, and watching them play even against Bethlehem Steel in the Philadelphia Stadium. So places like that to not have that, it's pretty sad, because they get the chance to play in these really cool stadiums, especially with the case of Bethlehem Steel, or now if they've changed their name to Philadelphia Union too.
Right.
But I would say that my primary focus is just having soccer back, and to do that in any aspect, which is picking hub cities, regional cities, breaking down the conferences into regional divisions.
Right.
What can you speak about in regard to that? And like, is there any time frame, or are we still just kind of waiting it out and playing it by ear at this point?
July 11th felt optimistic to me, just in terms of a time frame, because not every team has yet resumed full team training.
Right.
And we are less than 4 weeks away from that. And I mean, there's 3 in the Western Conference alone. I haven't even thought about the East quite yet. But there are 3 teams that still haven't trained. And you can't talk about competitive balance. You can't talk about a level playing field. You can't frankly, you can't talk about a product that you want to put on ESPN Plus yet. I would say that if you have these players who only played one game to begin with, and then they've had 3 months off, they've had a lot on their mind in terms of their quality of life because they don't earn, I mean, like half of them don't earn a living wage. Literally half of the USL players don't earn a living wage. So you aren't even starting to think about okay, well, let's get right back to the tactics. Let's make sure my first touch is great. Let's make sure that I'm, ready to handle the travel and probably 2 games a week for a while here. And I'm going to be in tip-top shape for that. That hasn't been at the forefront of their brains. And it probably shouldn't have. It doesn't need to have been. So being back wouldn't... there's still a lot that needs to be figured out in that regard. I mean, yeah, they are looking at the regionalized format. I think that in April, I reported that they were looking at splitting the conferences into 2 divisions, basically north-south of each conference, for want of a better descriptor. And that would make things easier. That would definitely make the travel component a lot easier. It would give you a quicker turnaround time between games, so you're not trying to go from Tampa to Hartford, over to St. Louis's East again this year. You're not trying to kind of run those triangles and book those flights or those buses. You're actually able to control much more of that. So that does help, especially for the teams that would prefer to bus given the current landscape. But there's still, they need to figure out that player component. The players submitted a proposal late last week, I'm being told, still working on finalizing the details of that. And the league has yet to respond to that as of Tuesday morning. So those talks are still ongoing. Sources aren't confident that it'll come back. I think that I noticed a change in how sources across the league at all levels of involvement have switched their verbiage from when we come back to if we come back again. That coded change has been made within the last 5 days. So we'll see. I tend to agree with you. I think at a certain point you have to just say, look, we're not going to be able to do this the way that every team wants to do this in terms of having fans there at 50% capacity or whatever you're looking at. But we do need to get back because we can't afford to lose the momentum of the lost season at a time when the USL finally is picking up momentum like it never had before.
For sure.
That answered a lot of my questions. I'm good on my end if you're good on yours, Gunnar.
Yeah, I mean, no, that was all good. And so, like, one of the things that was tough for me as well, how have you heard USL teams in a time where they're already dealing with a lot of financial stress, if that's a good term to use?
Yeah.
What are USL teams doing right now to stay afloat? Because in a lot of cases, they're dealing with a lot of financial stress to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And even last year, we're losing a few teams and League One as well. But I mean, what are teams doing right now to essentially stay afloat?
It is different team to team, and it really does depend on your owner structure. And the reasons that they're in this, maybe, is a good way to put this. There are still teams that have not furloughed a single employee, have not forced a single pay cut onto a single salary of someone who isn't like a C level, like a CEO, COO. Some of them are still voluntarily taking pay cuts, but as far as like the season ticket staff, the match day staff, who would be on salary retainers, the club doctors, all training staff, all of that stuff, they're still on. There are some clubs where they've had to make those decisions and they've had to furlough like half of their front office. There have been clubs like Ford Madison and Richmond Kickers who have been doing special merchandise giveaways where they'll be, whether it's towels or tickets or shirts or whatever, where proceeds go back into the club, obviously, and then they're able to do a better job of making sure people are looked after. It really is case by case. But yeah, a lot of the teams that have had to make those tough decisions to let employees go, they're focusing on the bottom line of it rather than the momentum aspects of it. And it's an adage that, yes, there's kind of that world adage that it's, more stable than the Bank of England to own a sports team, but also you don't make money with a sports team. You just stay at a very similar level of loss with a very slight potential of a gain through a TV contract. And I think right now there are a lot of teams that are waiting for that 2026 nest egg that they keep thinking is going to come from the World Cup. And looking at it from the financial side instead of the sporting side of it, I think that that's something that this layoff and these negotiations in particular have really highlighted for a lot of people across the league is that they don't quite know the intentions of everyone in the league or in American sports for that matter, as you're seeing it now with the MLB. The literal grandfather of all of the sports leagues in this country. Money talks, and that's the reality of it. And I think that every single team is changing their approach week by week just to figure out how long this thing's going to go.
I think the last thing I want to mention or ask you is run down the options that come with a best case scenario situation with the USL. What is something that, and I mean, it could be July or whatever, like in your opinion, what do you think is the best case scenario?
So just from where I'm sitting, what makes the most sense? Kind of that.
Yes.
I would say no pay cuts for players. There's just, it's such a minimal, trivial sticking point where if an owner, they would probably save about $20,000 to $25,000 a year if the pay cuts that the owner / proposed went through. If you're to a point as a sports team owner where $20,000 to $25,000 to your workforce is too much for you to bear, and you keeping that 20 to 25K would be enough for you to feel confident in your investment, you're in the wrong business.
Sure.
You are absolutely in the wrong arena. And you are not near financially stable enough or mentally benevolent enough to be doing the job you're doing for this community and for your employees. So no pay cuts. You're probably looking at mid to late July. You are looking at a regionalized tournament. Ideally, I would have found 4 hub cities, but if you're not going to be doing that and you're going to be doing the travel thing, keep it where buses aren't unrealistic. It's going to suck for the players, but at least that way you're not worrying about airport safety. You're not worried about the passenger 5 rows behind you sneezing on your back, nothing like that. So that's how you pull it off. You have each of these groups, you will have the top 2 teams. It's going to suck. People are going to be mad about this, but whatever. You can't please everyone. You're going to have 3 rounds of playoffs in my ideal system: quarterfinal, semifinal, final. So you probably have the top 2 teams from each division at this point. Just truncate it. And you can do like an NIT tournament, by the way. You can still say we're going to do the national kind of next in tournament just so that the rest of the teams can have something to do. That's okay. They can still host games. People will turn up anyway. So you can find a way to pull that out, or they won't turn up because they can't, right? But people will watch it. You run that, you have the best team in the Northwest play the second best team in the Southwest, and vice versa. You have the 2 winners of that advance. You probably play this all at a neutral site, if I'm being honest. Maybe Las Vegas, maybe St. Louis, because of all the fields they have at Scott Gallagher. You find a safe place to play this tournament. You do it like the Champions League is doing it with their final 8, where you all go to one city, you play these games, you have 4 days layoff, you will be in good condition at that point, and then you play again. And then that way you're able to look at turning the calendar to 2021 with the season fully wrapped up, able to approach 2021 as normal as possible, depending what the world throws at you, because at this point, who knows what the world has next.
For sure. I think that's well said.
I want to round it off with one last question for you. You're basically the maestro of USL news for many. So you got all the different viewpoints. What's your confidence level that we'll get through? It doesn't matter the format, because what's your confidence level that we'll have a successful in one way or the other USL championship season
in 2020?
Yes.
40%.
40%.
Last week it would have been 75. Now I'm down to 40 with some other stuff. And that's, I mean, like, look, part of this too is just, it's inevitable. Every single week is massive these days. If you have to wait a week in your return to play model and you're waiting an extra week to get back to training, you're waiting an extra week to restart games of quality. So even if you play before that, it's going to take 2 more weeks to shake the rust off. And these discussions with the players should have been so straightforward. Looking at it from both sides, this should have been both sides coming to the table saying, look, we just need to make sure we can play. Players don't want to make concessions, but if there's minor ones we have to make sure that we're able to come back as soon as possible, let's do that. But the onus is on the owners then to negotiate in good faith. If they're just trying to get as much money back as possible from this because they're looking at 2 advertisers who aren't going to be paying money this year, trying to make that up, again, you're in the wrong business at this point. And it is slowing down the rest of this for every other club that wants to pay their players in full. And there's a lot of clubs that want to pay their players in full. But if there is a very vocal minority of a dozen clubs or more who want to make sure that this is part of it before they start coming back, it's going to slow things down for the rest of them. You might have teams trying to opt in and opt out, and that's a disaster because then you have to renegotiate the terms of your franchise agreement, and then you have to basically beg the USL to let you back in 2021 and not just fold outright. It's going to get really messy if this thing doesn't get resolved in the next 2 weeks. I'll be completely honest with you. If you go into late June, we'll even say 5-10 days. If you go into late June and this is still unresolved and we're still in a holding pattern of that, I'm going even lower than 40% at that point. I mean, the clock is very realistically racing. And there's no way around that except for to just solve this. And for whatever reason, that kind of middle voice hasn't been the most vocal in these talks. And that's pretty worrisome for just the overall ethos of the sport, I would say. Yeah.
Well, that was really solid 25 minutes. We really appreciate you coming on. And if you guys haven't checked out Jeff, at Jeff Rueter, I believe is your Twitter handle. Check out him over there. And The Athletic, check out all of his articles. Everything's on point, especially if you love USL. Yeah, so we really appreciate you coming on.
We really do. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. Keep up the good work.
For sure. Thank you.
Yep.